today include legislators, a number of governor's cabinet members, and experts on state budget and financial issues. The topics were selected based on current issues affecting Virginia's counties, and I bet we'll all learn a lot today. Later this afternoon, the Finance Steering Committee will meet at 3:30 to start the process of formulating VACO's legislative platform. Tomorrow, the 6 other steering committees will do the same. The process culminates in our development of our VACO's legislative program, which will guide our longest during the 2015 General Assembly session. Also tomorrow, the governor has graciously adjusted his schedule to be here at 3 o'clock to present a budget overview for our local government. Thank you for being part of the county's official summer. I'll now turn it over to Phyllis Rico, who was the chairperson of this event. I'd like to thank her for all the hard work. Thank you.
Well, good morning. I'm excited to see all your smiling faces this morning. We had a really great response to this summit, and I think it's because of your interest in what you do, and I think it's because we have a great lineup of speakers today and tomorrow to bring you the information that you need now in your localities. And I just want to say a couple of things about VACO's education program. We recognize that being a leader in a locality involves more and more skill sets than ever before. You're dealing with more complex topics, you're dealing with them very quickly, and you need information and you need education. So knowing that, we've tried to enhance our educational offerings. We're still going to have those things that you all rely on, new supervisors forum, board chairs, supervisor certification, but we're adding a number of educational programs like today's 2-day summit, and really trying to find out what topics do you need, who do you need to hear from, what will help you in your day-to-day governance. And we want to reach not only the elected officials, but we want to reach your staff too, who has to deal with these issues on a daily basis. So we're adding topical sessions. We've had broadband sessions throughout the Commonwealth, fracking, stormwater webinar. We're trying to use a number of different formats. We're trying to come out into the localities. We're trying to reach you in many, many different ways to provide you what you need, when you need it, in a manner that is accessible to all of you. So having said that, let me just talk about a couple of housekeeping matters. As you see, this is a really packed agenda, and we haven't built in any breaks except for lunch from 12 to 1, which will be in the bistro. So we have coffee outside the room, the restrooms are down the hall, and take a break when you need to. You want to be quick because you don't want to miss anything. I also want to say that inside your agenda is something really important to us. As we work on enhancing our educational program, your feedback is essential to us. So please fill out your evaluation for however long you're with us and leave it at the front desk so we know what works, what doesn't. Any suggestions, comments, or compliments, we'll be happy to take them. We have half-hour slots for speakers, and speakers will probably be willing to take questions either throughout or at the end of their presentations, and we will have a mic that we can bring to the audience to do that. So let me start by introducing our first speaker, who is Secretary of Transportation Aubrey Layne. And as Secretary of Transportation, he oversees 7 agencies with over 10,000 employees and combined budgets of more than $5 billion. Prior to his appointment, he represented the Hampton Roads area on the Commonwealth Transportation Board from 2009 until January of 2014 when he was appointed to this position. Secretary Layne earned a bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Richmond and an MBA from Old Dominion University. And Secretary Layne, come on up and address.
If it's okay, I think I'll just walk around a little bit because I found in settings like this, I'll tell you a little bit about what's going on, and I've always found it very useful to get into questions. But thankful to be here today. When Governor McAuliffe asked me to become Secretary of Transportation, I wasn't sure exactly what I had in store, and I still don't know what I have in store, but it is glad to be here today. I've been involved in transportation since July of 2009. Now, July 1st was appointed to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and I don't know if on the Hampton Roads area, but you might know what happened July 3rd of 2009 in Hampton Roads. It was all across the headlines. It was called Carmageddon. They had a freak storm come through. Anybody familiar with Hampton Roads knows that bridges and tunnels are important. All the major bridges and tunnels had electrical failure, and the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, by a malfunctioning water valve, had 1 million gallons of water in the tube. So it was closed. So I'd been appointed 2 days before, and I get this call from then Secretary of Transportation saying, you need to come to a press conference to explain what happened. So, sure. I'll be happy to do that. So I'm calling all around, and everybody's doesn't really have any explanations. And I finally get the person that I succeeded on the transportation board. I called him, I left a message, and he called me back. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, thank you. It's about an hour before I got to go in front of the press. He'll tell me what to say, because certainly he's been in these situations before. So I pick up the phone and I hear these words: "This never happened on my watch." So that's my introduction into transportation. It's been a baptism by fire, and that continues today. Governor McAuliffe campaigned and now governing on a broad vision for transportation that really is twofold. One is making our citizens' lives better by offering transportation alternatives, and two, supporting economic development. And that fits well in my background. I'm an unavowed capitalist. I was in real estate development and capital-intensive businesses before. I believe infrastructure spending is core to our government, actually, quite frankly, our way of life. Because if we don't have the free movement of goods and services, if we don't get to our livelihoods better, we don't have mobility, I think our very liberties are impacted. Now, there's two ways, two cornerstones of Governor McAuliffe's transportation plan. One is that we will be good fiduciaries. That is paramount, and it was introduced, my background, I was an accounting major. I only stayed a few years in accounting because I wanted to do something else. I started as a CPA, so being a good fiduciary is very important to me also. And second of all, we need to pick the right projects. So those are really the overlying thinking behind Governor McAuliffe's vision that I've been entrusted by him to carry out. Now, that really gets down to what we're talking about today. I'm talking about transportation planning. And there's going to be some significant changes to that as we go through the next few years. First of all, it starts with, and I was talking with Scott York in the hall, it starts really with our overall transportation plan, which we call VTRAN, Virginia Transportation. We have to do it every 25 years. And when I was on the CTB, I was assigned to that subcommittee. And two things struck me as being, sort of odd as we went through it. One is that whatever the last plan started with is where we started for the next 25 years. It was made up every 5 years. We never went back to left and see, well, did we really end up where we thought we'd be? So one of the things you'll see as we go through this, and my Deputy Secretary, Dick Donahue, I think is going to speak to you tomorrow, we'll probably go more detail on this, is one of the things I believe is that we start planning, we ought to look at and make sure where we know where we are. If you look at the trends over the last decade in the Commonwealth of Virginia, particularly in transportation, we have budgeted or projected significant increases in ridership, population, that just hasn't occurred. There might be pockets, but overall. So, number one, make sure that we're realistic, because if those budgets are are based on unrealistic goals, and the money follows it, then if we don't make the budget, then what do we have? We have a disruption of our plan. So that'll be one thing that we'll be taking a hard look at. The second thing is the very measures themselves. Now in transportation, one of the things, particularly at the federal level, that's managed and that's looked at is how long it takes you to get from point A to point B. In other words, that's what they look at, mobility flow, the measure. And the theory is, the quicker you can do that, the better the transportation planning is. That's the theory. Now, let me give you an example. Denver, over the last decade, has seen an increase of almost 800,000 people. But its driving index has gone up about 10%. So, if you look at that, they're going to be not rated very well because they've got more people, more congestion, and it's taken longer to go. The average commute to work went up almost 12%. Let's contrast that to Detroit. Detroit has lost, we all know the problems, we're not trying to pick on them, but their time to get to work is greatly increased. I mean, it's decreased. Their measure is a whole lot better. But I don't think anybody in here would say you'd like to trade Denver for Detroit, and I'm not being critical. My point is, we need to make sure what we're measuring, or how we're measuring it, is measuring the results we want. So that's one thing you'll see at the very high level of planning, is that accountability and making sure we have realistic projections and what we're measuring is realistic. Now let me get down to something I think that's really going to be very impactful to you guys, and that is House Bill 2. Because during this legislative session, Governor McAuliffe directed me to work with Speaker Howe that will follow on to last year's landmark legislation, Bill 3313, of the additional monies that the statewide put in, that we work on a prioritization plan to ensure that we were getting the right projects picked. And the intent was to depoliticize at least a little bit of the process. Now, I served almost 5 years on the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And I can tell you, in those 5 years, most of the time when we got to the 6-year plan, I got about a week or two to review it. It had changed significantly from the previous year because as administrations and things change, governors have different priorities. And then I was asked to vote on it. And that's basically what happened. I'm not saying it's wrong, it's been doing that way. That works if you have plenty of monies and everybody's project eventually gets done. But we haven't found ourselves in that position. So one of the things House Bill 2 is to try to pick an allocation method that will look at the incremental benefit, that's both a financial and a other type of benefit return, as to how the Commonwealth Transportation Board allocates money across the state. Now, when I first got involved with transportation, I was told about the 3 A's. It was first of all appropriations. The legislators appropriated money. And then I was told about the second A was allocation. The Commonwealth Transportation Board allocates the monies across the Commonwealth. And the third A was authorization. When it got down to the level of the localities, the MPOs, they authorized the more projects. The problem is, there should be a fourth thing, that's accountability. Because nowhere was there a loop going back and forth to make sure that what was really projected was actually getting done. Hopefully, House Bill 2, working with how we're adopting VTrans, will help solve this. Now, the proposition of House Bill 2 is that we'll be able to look at a project in Bristol, a very small rural project potentially, and a very large urban project in Northern Virginia, and determine what is the best bang for the buck for the next incremental dollar for the taxpayers of the Commonwealth. That is a significant change from where we have been. And we went around and had 6-year plan hearings around, many of you I know I saw there. I made 2 comments about that process. One, I'm sure we won't get it right the first time. And 2, it's going to be very loud. Because the first thing I heard was, oh, you mean you're going to prioritize other people's projects, not my project, because my project is good. So, no, the law requires all the projects. Now let's talk about what the law says. The law says we have 5 criteria that we must look at. The Commonwealth Transportation Board must look at in prioritizing these projects. I'll start with urban. In urban areas, congestion mitigation has to be the most heavily weighted factor. So there are 5 factors. Congestion mitigation must be at least 21%. My guess is it's going to be much more than that, but the law requires it must be the most heavily weighted factor. In rural areas, the law says economic development has to be the most heavily weighted factor. Again, if it's 5, it's got to be at least 21%. My guess is the Transportation Board will say it should be much higher than that. The other 3 factors are 1, safety and mobility, which sort of go hand in hand. Safety, mobility, that's 1. Economic return, and that's got to be defined. And environmental concerns. So those are the 5 factors that are to be weighed. And the law says that you don't have to do it by district. If you think it's a rural project, you'll get a rural rate. So if you're in Hampton Roads, we have both rural and urban settings. So the Transportation Board can determine what the project is in that. Now, think about this. The first thing we're going to have to do is define those terms. Because I dare say if I went around and asked each one of you, define economic development for me, what's that mean in transportation? We'd get a lot of different answers. Same thing with congestion mitigation. So that's number 1 we're going to have to do. And then second, we're going to have to assign those weights, those weightings, so that when those projects are looked at or compared, that they will be, when I say equal, they'll be comparable to make sure that we're looking at apples and apples in that. The law gives us until July 1st, 2016. In fact, Speaker Howard wanted it to go into effect this year, and that would have been a very difficult process, I think, to do in that regard. So that's the process. And actually, Nick Donahue's coming tomorrow. He's leading this process in terms of getting the information. But we're starting the outreach. Now, the first thing that we did, the law says that intent is not to run out and get all these projects that are out there, get them all lined up so there's no monies to prioritize. The intent of the law is to not go out and say, oh, I'm going to get my project in there so that it doesn't have to be prioritized. In fact, it says Commonwealth Transportation Board may, at its discretion, exclude those that are 100% funded, those that have been through the environmental process, and those that are getting ready to go to construction or under construction. It says may. Now, I think that's the way the Commonwealth Transportation Board is going to include it. But it doesn't say shall in there. So what happened is, during this last 6-year plan, the Transportation Board tried to take a look at what projects could be impacted. Now, we all know, I know when I was on the CTB, I go back and talk to local officials. If I saw a project that was funded in years 4, 5, 6 plan, they had a good chance of that plan being changed because priorities change and what have you. So what we did this time around for the 6-year plan is we tried to identify those projects that clearly would fall under the intent of this new law. And what we did is we took a little bit of money off of them, saying that maybe they won't be there, but maybe they will be there. We just don't know until we go through the House Bill 2 prioritization process. This was combined with a $900 million reduction we had to do to the 6-year plan because of reduced projections of revenues over the next years because of decreased economic activity. As we went through there, many of you looked at and said, oh gosh, we had this project that was fully funded, now it's not. That's because we'll have to go through House Bill 2. But it wasn't, House Bill 2 wasn't meant to eviscerate the current plan. So we tried not to do any of those projects that were currently under construction or were getting ready to start construction. Now, I'm sure we didn't get all that right, and we'll have to go through this process. In fact, we'll be going through that again this fall and try to fine-tune that. But that's what's going on as we go through. There'll be public hearings as we go through and look at those projects. Now, the law doesn't require that, and I don't know if it's going to be a ABC process or 1 through 100 rating, that's all going to be determined. But what it says, let's assume it's 100. The law doesn't say if your project scores 99 and I have a project that scores 94, that I've got to do the 99 one first. But what it says is if you've got one that scores 99 and one that scores 20 and you decide to fund the 20 first, you better determine and be ready to justify why you did that in there. So it doesn't require the CTB to go down the list, but it does say you better be transparent and open about why you didn't do it. So the theory is that the more transparency and the more accountability we get, the better decisions we'll get on how we allocate these monies. Now, there are a few things that are that this prioritization is not subject to. First of all, any safety-related item, anything that's strictly done for safety, doesn't get prioritized. Law requires us, current law, that's got to be done anyway. There are certain federal programs, CMAC, other programs that are not required to be prioritized. They could be, as of right now, we're not going to do that in there. The law doesn't require revenue sharing. The theory of this, if you're willing to put up 50% of your money, that must be a pretty good project. So that doesn't require to be prioritized. There's a couple transit monies of big. Transit is not required to be prioritized. That may come back as we go, but right now it's not required to be prioritized. But most everything else is. And if you think about the 6-year plan, then the next couple of years, there's not a whole lot that has to be prioritized because most of the monies are on projects that are going. But as we go out, looks like it's going to be, as we start, $200 or $300 million a year and grow as we get out. The theory is that if we can get a plan that you can rely on at the local level, and our agencies, VDOT, can rely on, that they know every year, if they see a project in year 6, it's going to use year 5, 4, and go through the process, that they will be more efficient also in delivering projects. You can be more efficient in your planning. That's what the objective of this is. Now, it is going, again, to be a very, very significant change. One of the things that I would go back when I was on the Transportation Board, our locals would get the 6-year plan. They go, Hampton Roads has 20% of the population. We better get at least 20% of the money. Well, that goes out the window. Right now, it is based on the projects. So I expect it to be very loud as we go through this. And then CTB does have equity. We're not going to, if we do the scoring, it comes up and it all goes to one district, I assure you that that will not be, we haven't got the scoring right. We haven't got the scoring right in that regard. So that's the process that we're going through. This will also impact the formulas. I know a big thing in this room is right now there's no money running through formulas. And with the reductions that we've had to take in, there won't be any for 5 or 6 years and going out. And that's not necessarily related to House Bill 2, but it is related to the reductions in the projections that we're getting. It's almost $1 billion. $900 million last year. I expect another $100 million that we'll have to revise this fall in that. A lot of it has to do with the economic activity, the sequester, and the receipts in Northern Virginia and Hampton Roads. In that, I mean, that's where it is. But I do know it's an issue getting money back to the localities. So one of the things we'll also be looking at is how do we do that with House Bill 2 and the formulas? Is that through a grant program? Is that through some type of local set-aside? We'll be looking at that because we do know that it's important. So that is the general overview of planning at the high level and how it's going to particularly come down to your level. And while I could go on and on about specifics, I thought I'd open it up for questions. Looks like I've got about 5 or maybe 10 minutes. Open it up for questions to talk about that or any other topic that you'd like to speak of. Yes, sir.
Two questions. I guess
That's already occurred. That happened,
Okay.
that's occurred. That's occurred.
I have to ask the question. Why is it that you're going to be spending $65 million on streetcars in Arlington? And obviously, there's no congestion relief requirement there. In Loudon, we're going to be spending up to $12 million to support our local fixed route bus service, which mostly supports indigent people, so I'm concerned about that. And secondly, will this administration, or other administrations, both Republican and Democrat, have failed, is to support an extra inbound lane on I-66 on the Beltway? I mean, I-66 in Arlington. I've talked to some Arlington supervisors so that they would support it if it were a bus, HOV3 lane. I tell you, I'm getting a little tired of one county and one little town, Falls Church, standing in the way of one of the worst congestion bottlenecks in Northern Virginia. That's where the access road meets I-66. So, two questions in one.
Sure. Let me take the first one. We did announce that we were willing to work with the counties of Fairfax and Arlington to promote the streetcar. It's actually light rail, the same light rail that's going on in Hampton Roads, the type of car. It's the most heavily trafficked corridor in the Commonwealth. And we do think that the project stands on its own merits in terms of transitory development, its life cycle costs. But that's all going to be developed in that. But to your second question, Mr. Reed, I don't for a minute think that transportation is not going to have some politics involved, no matter how good we get the allocation. Now, having said that, there are multimodal solutions, and some solutions are contingent upon other solutions. I think it's a give and take. So, while I can't give any type of specifics, I do think that is a conversation that people we ought to have. And in that regard, you know, we've talked about 66, Interstate 66, outside the Beltway. We've got to have solutions inside the Beltway as we go through that. I won't presuppose what they will be, but I do believe a lot of things are about compromise. I know that's a dirty word in many sectors today, but I do believe it is about give and take. And so, to answer your question, I don't have specifics, but I do think it's something that we ought to consider.
Come from a very rural county, Augusta County, has a lot of dirt roads that have not been paved at all. How does this fall into the prioritization of dollars for pavement of secondary roads, the unpaved roads at the current? We're using the rural rustic as much as we can, but there are some roads, because of the transportation of heavy farm vehicles, transportation of lots of semis and stuff like this taking products to market, that rural rustic just does not work. And how do we work this for prioritization?
Right. Actually, I had a chance to see a lot of those. I've been to every district, and I am not either encumbered nor am I blessed with being an engineer. And I'll answer your question in two parts. First of all, safety has to be prioritized. Does not have to be prioritized. And many of these dirt roads, I think, from a safety perspective, ought to be done. Now, when I get into it and I talk to VDOT, the next thing you know, we've got a road that doesn't look anything like the road that was there before. To which I say, just pave the road. So that's one thing we're working on. If it was, you know, if they could do it before, I don't see where paving it makes it unsafe. So that's not an engineering. I know federal money is required, but one of the things that I try to come from is a practical solution in that I don't think we should let a perfect road get in the way of us trying to solve the problem in that regard. Over-engineered. So that's one. The other is, quite frankly, that it's just the thing to do. I mean, I don't know how to put it that way. One of the things we'll be working on is a small, I don't mean to be in a negative terms, but smaller grant type of things that address situations like this and others. I was at a meeting of the 6-year plan hearing, and a guy been coming for 10 years from Charlotte County asking for $200,000 because he's got an unsafe sidewalk that's crumbling and he's had citizen action. Now, that shouldn't take 10 years to get attention. And quite frankly, from what I've had to deal with, I'm not trying to be trivial, but $200,000 is not something that we can't find. I mean, in that regard. So, that's one of the things working became very apparent to me. There are a lot of things that for a little bit of money, comparatively, could make a big difference in there and in people's lives. So, I'm not suggesting that we don't have to go through the process in the Commonwealth Transportation Board, but I am suggesting that we can take a more practical approach. We don't have to use federal money. We can use state monies, where we don't have to go through that. I should mention one thing. I should have mentioned there's one really large threat, though, to our plans. House Bill 2313 really did a lot for maintenance. We haven't had a lot more going into on a statewide basis, and we rely heavily on federal funds. And we just did get another patch for 10 months on the Highway Safety Trust, the Highway Trust Fund. But we've got to find a permanent solution. There's no way we can develop these major projects not knowing that our federal funding partners are not going to be with us. I've been up on Capitol Hill testifying, met with Secretary Fox, not trying to be prescriptive on what they do. I don't think it's going to be a single bullet. It's going to take a programmatic approach. But the thing that we can't have sustainability in how we plan these major projects just doesn't make any sense. So hopefully we'll get that fixed. So that's a practical approach. I think we'll get there.
So one more question.
Yeah, Secretary Jeff McKay from Fairfax County.
Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I want to first thank you for joining us today, and I want to thank you for the state stepping up on the streetcar project that was mentioned earlier, because it is important. But an equally important topic, and you kind of touched on a little bit with the maintenance money. What I'm hearing everywhere I go is what's happening on our subdivision streets and existing roads that are falling apart. And in our urban area, we have roads actually that are the inverse of this gentleman's concern, that are paved roads that are starting to look like dirt roads, and people want them to get repaved. And as you know, from a local government standpoint, the quality of this infrastructure and subdivisions and on minor arterials directly relates to people's property values, which directly relates to our local budgets. And so people, I think the political support for the new money for transportation is starting to get soured in some circles, because of course people expect to see immediate results, and they're not seeing it when it comes to repaving and some of the maintenance down to the subdivision street level. And I know how things get rated and how important the interstate system is, major arterials. How do you feel about where we're going financially with getting to some of the maintenance and some of the minor arterials and subdivision streets that at local level we're hearing a lot about? Just can we get these things repaved? What is the future in that area, and how do you feel about that?
Sure. It is I hope the future is much better than the past. What we're suffering from is over the last 25 years, no new monies or keeping up with monies coming into the state coffers. No, mostly state monies are for maintenance, and federal monies, for the most part, cannot be used for maintenance, for the most part, sometimes. We're behind, because on the CTB, the money was shifted, more people on the interstates, primaries, things were shifted there. Now we know we had a big hole to climb out of. Garrett Moore, Chief Engineer, is particularly aware of this. We're working through that. A couple of things that we're doing. One is we can be considered a primary now, has been made more inclusive, so some of these secondaries can be considered primaries to move it up. But also, what happened this year, we had 5 snowstorms, and we double-edged sword there to tear up our roads to clean them, and then the $350 million that only about 150 was budgeted, it comes out of the maintenance to do it. But you have to answer your question is, it won't be a short-term fix, but it is on the radar. More money's been put in secondary roads. And if you look, I think you look at the maintenance, you can see that. But we've got a big hole to dig out of. But we do recognize it, and that's what we're trying to put money. That's what I was saying. That That's why crossover probably will last a little longer, because we probably are going to need to put more focus there.
We'll take one more question.
You keep forgetting me.
Secretary Layne, it's so nice having you here this morning, and I'm Jack Miller, I'm the chairman of Middlesex County, and a question I want to ask, Interstate 64 is very vital to my county, especially for our farm products and our seafood products, and I've been told that the expansion of 64 between the Hampton Roads area and the Richmond is in process. Can you explain to me where we are in the process?
Sure. Yeah, I know Governor McAuliffe campaigned on this, and where we are is right now there's about 6 miles leaving Patrick Henry area, up to about 199 is all that is actually currently programmed. That's a lane in each direction in the current right-of-way that'll be used. Now, there are two, quite frankly, there are just not enough state monies to do that unless you want to consider having some type of managed lane alternative, which has not been considered at the present time. Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission came into being this year, just like MDTA, their sister organization. They have the abilities to bond monies, and I know that is the #1 priority. So I do see it being extended more up towards the other side of Williamsburg and up in that area, which quite frankly is about 90% of the problem. 90%. Not all of it, and particularly if it's football weekends, not all of it. But it's on the normal, it's about 90%. But I think it's critical that we do get it all the way at least to 295 in that regard, whether we go in for working with Richmond. So working with them, they invited me to come over with their MPO to brainstorm how we do this. That would have to go through House Bill 2. I mean, that'll be a project that we'd love to go through it. But I do see it going at least through Williamsburg, a lot of the traffic. Now, if you're a tourist going to Hampton Roads, gets you a little bit further. Except unless something happens at the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel or another water crossing, it's still going to be jammed up getting over there. Now, we still got to determine what's going to happen on 460, and maybe that would go to 295, and that will give an alternative. But right now, that's all that's in the plan, and hopefully we'll get more in there.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for having us.